She inherited a lighthouse no one could open for 37 years, and when she finally broke the seal, what she found on the top floor wasn't just $350 million in stolen masterpieces. It was the truth about why she'd been abandoned as a baby and left to grow up alone. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The rain hammered against the cracked window of Maren Cole's studio apartment like it was trying to break through, to wash away the stale smell of grease from the fish market below and the mold creeping up the bathroom wall. She sat at her wobbly kitchen table, still in her waitress uniform, staring at an envelope that had arrived 3 days ago. She'd been too afraid to open it. Too afraid of what it might say, what it might change, what it might demand from a life that was already hanging by threads so thin they barely held. The return address said Coastal Maine Legal Services. The paper was heavy, expensive, not the kind of thing that showed up in the mailbox of a 28-year-old woman who split her time between Murphy's Diner and O'Malley's Seafood Shack, who sometimes chose between paying electric or eating decent meals, who'd learned a long time ago not to expect anything from anyone because expecting only led to disappointment. Maren ran her calloused fingers over the seal. Her nails were chipped, 2 of them broken from scrubbing dishes earlier. She'd worked a double shift, 6 in the morning until nearly 11 at night, and her feet throbbed in a way that made her want to cry. But she didn't cry. She'd stopped crying somewhere around age 12 in her 4th foster home when she realized tears changed nothing and no one was coming to wipe them away. She finally tore the envelope open. The letter inside was typed on letterhead that looked official and cold. She read it once, then twice, her heart beating faster with each word. It made no sense. None of it made any sense at all. Dear Miss Maren Cole, we are writing to inform you that you are the sole beneficiary of the estate of Eleanor Whitmore, deceased. Miss Whitmore passed away on April 14, 2016, and left specific instructions that her estate be transferred to you upon proper identification. The estate consists primarily of real property located at Ravens Point Lighthouse, Cove Harbor, Maine, as well as associated structures and land holdings. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to arrange transfer of deed and discuss the terms of inheritance. Maren read the name again. Eleanor Whitmore. She turned it over in her mind like a stone she'd found on a beach, examining it from every angle. Nothing. She knew no one by that name, had never heard it spoken, never seen it written. She pulled out her phone and searched. The results were sparse. An obituary from 7 years ago, clinical and brief. Eleanor Whitmore, 73, of Cove Harbor. No surviving family. Private burial. No surviving family. Except, apparently, Maren. She looked around her tiny apartment. 1 room serving as bedroom, living room, and kitchen. A bathroom so small you had to close the door to use the sink. Water stains on the ceiling. A hot plate because the stove didn't work. This was her life. This was all she had. And now some stranger had left her a lighthouse? Maren barely slept that night. She kept thinking about the one thing she did have from her past, the only possession that had followed her through every foster home, every social worker's office, every temporary placement. She got up and pulled it from the drawer of her bedside table, a small brass compass, tarnished and old, with strange symbols etched around its face. No one knew where it came from. It had been with her when she was found as an infant, abandoned at Portland General Hospital 28 years ago. No note, no name, nothing but a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket with this compass tucked beside her. She held it now, felt its familiar weight. In all her years of searching for answers about where she came from, she'd never found a single lead. The hospital records said she'd been left in the emergency room waiting area sometime before dawn. Security footage showed nothing useful. A figure in a hooded coat, face obscured, leaving quickly. The police investigated for exactly 2 weeks before the case went cold. Baby Girl Doe. That's what they called her until her first foster mother gave her the name Maren because she'd always liked it. She turned the compass over. The symbols made no sense. They weren't cardinal directions, weren't any language she recognized. Just strange markings that spiraled around the edge like they were trying to tell a story she couldn't read. The next morning, exhausted and running on coffee that tasted like burnt regret, Maren called the law office. A secretary answered, chipper and efficient, and scheduled her for an appointment that afternoon. She called in sick to the diner, first time in 18 months, and caught the bus north to Cove Harbour. The town was smaller than she expected, the kind of coastal Maine village that looked like it had peaked sometime in the 1950s and had been slowly fading ever since. Weathered buildings, boats in various states of repair, the smell of salt and old wood everywhere. The law office was above a bait shop, and the stairs creaked like they were giving away secrets. The lawyer was a thin man in his 60s named Richard Howell. He had kind eyes and hands that shook slightly when he handed her documents to sign. "I've been the executor of Miss Whitmore's estate for 7 years, he said. She left very specific instructions. The property was to go to you and only you, but only when you were located and properly identified. "But I don't understand," Maren said. "I don't know who she was. I've never even heard her name." Richard pulled out a file, old and thick. Eleanor Whitmore was the daughter of the lighthouse keeper at Ravens Point. She grew up there, lived there most of her life. The lighthouse was decommissioned in 1981, but the family was allowed to remain in the keeper's cottage. Eleanor's father passed in 1985. She lived alone after that. "But why me? Why would she leave anything to a complete stranger?" Richard's expression shifted, became careful. Her instructions were quite specific. She said the property should go to the girl with the compass. She left a description of this compass. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. On it was a hand-drawn sketch, an exact replica of the compass Maren had been carrying her entire life. The room tilted slightly. Maren gripped the edge of the desk. "How did she know about this?" "I don't know," Richard said quietly. She never explained, but she was adamant. She said when the right person appeared, when someone came forward with that compass, they were to inherit everything. "She paid me a retainer to search for you, but we had very little to go on. It wasn't until you renewed your driver's license last year and the address change flagged in our database search that we found you." Maren pulled the compass from her jacket pocket and set it on the desk between them. Richard leaned forward, compared it to the drawing. His eyebrows rose. "That's it. That's exactly it." "What's at this lighthouse?" Maren asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard hesitated. "I don't know. I've never been inside. No one has. The main tower has been sealed since 1987. Eleanor had it locked, some kind of special mechanism. She told me before she died that only the right person could open it. That only you could open it." "That doesn't make any sense." "I know." Richard gathered the papers, slid them into a folder, and handed it to her. "But it's yours now. The lighthouse, the keeper's cottage, 12 acres of land on Ravens Point. All of it. The property taxes are paid through a trust for the next 15 years. You don't owe anything. It's free and clear." Maren took the folder with numb fingers. Free and clear. Nothing in her life had ever been free and clear. Richard drove her out to Ravens Point himself. The road twisted along the coastline, becoming narrower and rougher until it was barely more than gravel and broken asphalt. They crested a hill, and there it was. The lighthouse stood alone on a promontory of dark rocks, white stone rising against a grey sky, waves crashing at its base with a violence that seemed ancient and eternal. It was taller than she'd imagined, maybe 80 feet, with a keeper's cottage attached to its base like an afterthought. The whole structure looked solid, weathered but standing, defiant against decades of storms. "I'll leave you to look around," Richard said as he pulled to a stop. "I have a meeting back in town. Call me if you need anything." He handed her a key ring with 3 old brass keys. One for the cottage, one for the exterior lighthouse door, and one that Eleanor said you'd know what to do with. Maren stepped out into the wind. It hit her immediately, sharp and cold, carrying the taste of salt and something else, something like sadness, like loneliness. The kind of feeling you get in places where people used to live but don't anymore. She walked slowly toward the lighthouse, her boots crunching on the rocky ground. Seagulls screamed overhead. The cottage door opened easily with the first key. Inside, it smelled of dust and time, but it was cleaner than she expected. Furniture still arranged, kitchen still stocked with dishes in the cabinets, like someone had just stepped out and never returned. Maren moved through the rooms carefully, running her fingers along surfaces. There were photos on the walls, black and white images of a young woman standing beside the lighthouse, smiling. In one, she held a baby. Maren's breath caught. She moved closer. The photo was dated on the back in faded ink. 1987, 28 years ago, the year Maren was born. She set the photo down with trembling hands and moved toward the lighthouse entrance. The exterior door opened with the second key, revealing a circular room at the lighthouse's base. It was empty except for a spiral staircase that wound upward into darkness. But 10 feet up, the staircase ended at a massive steel door, unlike anything she'd ever seen. It was seamless, industrial, completely out of place in this old lighthouse. There was no handle, no visible lock, just a smooth steel surface with a circular indent in its center, maybe 4 inches in diameter. Around the indent, etched into the steel, were symbols, the same symbols that were on her compass. Maren's heart hammered against her ribs. She pulled the compass from her pocket and held it up to the door. The symbols matched perfectly, not just similar, but identical. The compass fit the indent exactly. She pressed it into the space. Nothing happened. She turned it clockwise. Nothing. Counterclockwise, still nothing. Frustrated, she pulled it back out and stared at the door. "What am I missing?" she whispered into the empty space. The lighthouse offered no answer, just the distant sound of waves and wind. Maren spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the cottage more thoroughly. She found Eleanor's bedroom, the bed still made with a faded quilt, a bookshelf full of novels and journals. She pulled one of the journals out carefully. The pages were yellowed, the handwriting elegant and slanted. The first entry was dated January 3rd, 1986. "The winter is cold this year. The waves sound angry, like they know something I don't. James says I worry too much, that everything will be fine, but I can feel it in my bones. Something is coming, something that will change everything." Maren flipped through more pages. The entries talked about daily life, about maintaining the lighthouse even though it was no longer operational, about a man named James who Eleanor clearly loved. And then, dated March 12th, 1987, "She's here, my beautiful girl. James doesn't know yet. He's been gone for 2 weeks on business. I don't know how to tell him. I don't know how to protect her. They're getting closer. I can feel them watching. I have to make a choice no mother should ever have to make." The next entry was dated March 20th. "I did it. God forgive me, I did it. I left her where she'll be safe, where they can't find her. The compass will bring her back when the time is right, when it's safe, when she's strong enough to understand. I pray every night that I made the right choice. I pray she'll forgive me." After that, the entries became sporadic, fragmented. References to sealing the tower, to protecting what mattered most, to waiting for the girl who would come. The final entry was dated December 8th, 2015. "I'm dying. The doctors say I have months, maybe weeks. I've arranged everything. The lawyer has his instructions. The lighthouse will wait. She'll come. I know she will. And when she does, she'll understand why I had to let her go, why I had to hide her, why I had to sacrifice everything to keep her safe. To my daughter, I loved you more than my own life. I'm sorry I couldn't be your mother in the way you deserved. But I gave you the only thing I could, a chance. Use it well." Maren's hands shook so hard she nearly dropped the journal. She read the entry 3 more times, tears streaming down her face now, hot and unstoppable. Eleanor was her mother. This woman who'd died alone in this isolated place was her mother. The woman who'd abandoned her had been trying to save her. But save her from what? She wiped her eyes roughly and kept reading through other journals, finding pieces of a story that didn't quite fit together yet. Eleanor mentioned James repeatedly. James who traveled for work, James who'd gotten involved in something dangerous, James who promised it would all be worth it. There were newspaper clippings tucked between pages, Articles about an art heist in Boston in 1986. Masterpieces stolen from the Ashford Museum, never recovered. Hundreds of millions in art just vanished. One clipping showed a photo of a man being led away in handcuffs. The caption read, "James Whitmore, 32, questioned in connection with Ashford heist." Whitmore, an insurance investigator, maintains his innocence. Maren stared at the photo. This was her father, a man she'd never known, never even heard of until this moment. He looked scared in the picture, angry, desperate. She found another article dated 4 months later. James Whitmore found dead, apparent suicide. Whitmore, primary suspect in Ashford Museum theft, was found in his hotel room. Police suspect suicide, though investigation continues. Apparent suicide. Maren had spent enough time around tragedy to know that apparent suicide often meant something else entirely. Eleanor's journal entry from that same week was just 2 lines. "They killed him. They're coming for me next. I have to finish the work." The sun was setting by the time Maren made her way back to the Lighthouse Tower. She stood at the base of the spiral stairs, looking up at that impenetrable steel door. Her mother had sealed something up there, something worth protecting, something worth giving up your own child to hide. She tried the compass again. This time, she didn't just press it in. She held it there, closed her eyes, tried to feel what Eleanor might have felt, tried to connect across 28 years of separation and sacrifice, and then she felt it. The faintest vibration, so subtle she almost missed it. The compass was warm in her hand, warmer than it should be. She opened her eyes. The symbols on the door were glowing, faintly, barely visible, but definitely glowing with a soft blue light. Maren's breath caught. She turned the compass slowly clockwise, watching as each symbol lit up in sequence. When the final symbol illuminated, something deep within the door clicked. A sound like tumblers falling in a massive lock, mechanical and precise. The steel door shuddered, then began to move, sliding inward with a hiss of air that had been trapped for decades. The smell that emerged was strange, not musty like she expected, but clean, almost sterile, with an undertone of sea air. The door opened about 6 inches and stopped. Beyond it was darkness and the continuation of the spiral staircase leading up into the tower. Maren stood frozen, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. This was it. Whatever her mother had sealed away, whatever truth had been worth abandoning a child to protect, it was up there in the darkness waiting. She started to step forward, then stopped. The sun had almost completely set. The lighthouse was growing dark. She had no flashlight, no supplies, no real plan. She stepped back, breathing hard. The smart thing to do was to come back tomorrow, prepared, in daylight. But as she turned to leave, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Footsteps outside on the gravel. Someone else was here. Maren moved quickly to the cottage window and peered out carefully. In the fading light, she saw a figure standing near the edge of the property, just beyond where the gravel ended and the rocks began. A man, tall, wearing a dark jacket. He was looking at the lighthouse, then down at something in his hands. A phone, she thought, though she couldn't be sure from this distance. He hadn't seen her. Or if he had, he was pretending he hadn't. She watched as he made a call, spoke briefly, then turned and walked back toward the access road where a dark sedan was parked. She hadn't even noticed it arrive. The car pulled away slowly, headlights cutting through the dusk. Maren's hands were shaking again, but not from grief this time. From fear. Someone else knew about this place. Someone else was watching. She looked back toward the lighthouse tower where the steel door stood open just 6 inches, darkness beyond, secrets waiting in the heights above. Her mother had spent years hiding something up there, had given up everything to protect it. And now, standing in the growing darkness of the cottage, Maren realized she wasn't the only one who'd been waiting for that door to open. Someone else had been waiting too. And they were out there right now, watching, planning, knowing that after 37 years of sealed silence, the lighthouse was finally about to give up its secrets. Maren pulled the cottage curtains closed and locked every door and window. She sat in the dark for a long time, holding her compass, thinking about her mother, about choices and sacrifices, about what could be hidden in a lighthouse tower that was worth dying to protect, worth killing to obtain. She didn't sleep at all that night. She sat at Eleanor's kitchen table, reading through every journal she could find, piecing together fragments of a story about stolen art, dangerous men, and a woman who'd hidden her daughter to save her from people who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. When dawn finally broke grey and cold over the ocean, Maren made a decision. She wasn't running. She wasn't walking away. This place, this mystery, this inheritance of secrets and sacrifice, it was hers. Eleanor had left it to her for a reason. And she was going to find out what was waiting at the top of that tower, no matter who else was watching. No matter what it cost, because after 28 years of being nobody, of coming from nothing, of having no past and no answers, Maren finally had something worth fighting for. She had a mother who'd loved her enough to let her go, and somewhere up in that sealed tower she had the truth. Maren waited until full daylight before approaching the lighthouse tower again. The morning was cold and sharp, the kind of coastal Maine morning where the wind cuts through layers of clothing like they're made of paper. She'd packed a backpack with supplies, 2 heavy-duty flashlights, rope, a utility knife, water bottles, protein bars, and her phone fully charged, though there was no cell service out here. She'd also grabbed a tire iron from the cottage garage, just in case. Just in case of what, she wasn't entirely sure, but the memory of that figure watching from the rocks last night made her want something solid in her hands. The steel door stood exactly as she'd left it, open 6 inches, waiting. In daylight, she could see the mechanism more clearly. The door was at least 4 inches thick, reinforced, the kind of thing you'd find in a bank vault, not a lighthouse. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to seal whatever was up there. Maren pressed the compass into the circular indent again, felt that strange warmth, watched the symbols glow faint blue. This time, when she turned it, the door continued its slide inward, opening fully with a pneumatic hiss that spoke of sophisticated engineering. The preservation, the climate control, the security, none of this was amateur work. She clicked on her flashlight and stepped onto the spiral staircase. The steps were iron, solid beneath her boots. As she climbed, her flashlight beam swept across the curved stone walls, revealing something she hadn't noticed in yesterday's fading light. The walls were covered with etchings, the same symbols from the compass, but arranged in patterns that seemed to tell a story. Every 10 steps or so, small alcoves had been carved into the stone, and each one held something. The first alcove, about 20 steps up, contained a photograph in a waterproof frame. Maren stopped and lifted it carefully. The photo showed a young woman, maybe 25, standing in front of the lighthouse. She was laughing, her dark hair blowing in the wind, her hand raised to shield her eyes from the sun. On the back, written in the same elegant script from the journals, Eleanor, 1983, the year everything began. Maren's throat tightened. This was her mother young, alive, full of hope. Before whatever happened to steal that light from her eyes, she carefully placed the photo back and continued climbing. The second alcove held a pair of child's shoes, tiny white leather with scuff marks on the toes. A note beside them read, "My first steps, 1962. My father held my hands and walked me around the gallery of the light." Third alcove, a brass nameplate engraved with Samuel Whitmore, lighthouse keeper, Ravens Point, 1958 to 1985. Eleanor's father, Maren's grandfather, a man she'd never known existed until yesterday. Fourth alcove, a wedding photo. Eleanor in a simple white dress, standing beside a tall man with kind eyes and a nervous smile. James. The back read, "Our wedding, June 7th, 1986. 3 months before everything fell apart." Maren had to stop, had to press her hand against the cold stone wall and breathe. These weren't just objects, they were a life, her mother's life, laid out in fragments like breadcrumbs leading up into the darkness. Each alcove was a memory, deliberately placed, a story Eleanor wanted told. She kept climbing. The fifth alcove held love letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. Maren untied them carefully, read the first one by flashlight. James's handwriting was messy, urgent. Eleanor, my love, I know you're worried. I know this job seems dangerous, and maybe it is, but the money will set us up for life. One more assignment, one more authentication, and we can start our family without worry. I promise I'm being careful. I promise I'll come home to you. Always, James. Dated March 1986. Maren's hands trembled as she tied the letters back together and replaced them. Her father had been in deep, working something that had gotten him killed. Insurance investigator, the newspaper had said. But what kind of insurance investigation got you murdered? The sixth alcove held newspaper clippings carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. She'd seen some of these in Eleanor's journals, but here they were arranged in chronological order. The Ashford Museum heist, March 15th, 1986. 37 paintings stolen in a sophisticated overnight operation. No alarms triggered. Inside job suspected. Estimated value at the time, $120 million. The next clipping, James Whitmore questioned. James Whitmore arrested. James Whitmore released on bail. James Whitmore found dead. And then, tucked at the bottom of the stack, an article she hadn't seen before. Small, barely a few paragraphs, dated August 19th, 87. Eleanor Whitmore, widow of James Whitmore, reported missing. Last seen at Ravens Point Lighthouse, search ongoing. But Eleanor hadn't been missing. She'd been hiding, right here in this lighthouse, in this cottage, sealing away whatever her husband had left behind. Maren climbed higher. Her legs were starting to ache, her breath coming harder. She'd counted over 100 steps so far, and the tower kept spiraling upward. The seventh alcove held a small jewelry box. Inside, a simple gold ring and a hospital bracelet. The bracelet was tiny, meant for an infant. It read, Baby Girl Whitmore, March 10th, 1987. Maren's birth date, her name, the one she'd never known she had. She sank down onto the iron steps, clutching the bracelet. Her mother had kept this, had placed it here deliberately, knowing someday Maren would climb these stairs and find it, knowing she'd need proof, would need to understand. Tears blurred her vision as she carefully put the bracelet back. She couldn't afford to fall apart, not now. Not when she was so close to understanding. The eighth alcove stopped her cold. It contained a metal box, about the size of a shoebox, with a simple clasp lock. No key required. Maren pulled it out with shaking hands and sat on the steps, the flashlight propped beside her. She opened the clasp. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, and on top, a birth certificate. She picked up the certificate first, held it under the flashlight beam. Certificate of live birth, state of Maine. Name, Maren Eleanor Whitmore. Born, March 10th, 1987, Portland General Hospital. Mother, Eleanor Ann Whitmore. Father, James Michael Whitmore. There it was. Official, legal, undeniable. She wasn't baby girl Doe. She was Maren Eleanor Whitmore. She had parents. She had a name. She had existed to someone. She set the certificate aside with trembling hands and lifted the first photograph. It showed Eleanor in a hospital bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny newborn wrapped in a yellow blanket. The same yellow blanket Maren had been found in. Eleanor was looking down at the baby with such fierce love it made Maren's chest ache. On the back, Maren, 1 hour old, you are everything. The next photo, Eleanor holding the baby in the keeper's cottage, sunlight streaming through the windows. Maren, 3 days old, your father still doesn't know about you. He's been gone 5 weeks. I'm terrified to tell him, terrified of what it means. Another photo. Eleanor and the baby on the lighthouse gallery, the ocean spread out behind them. Maren, 1 week old. I have to make a decision. They're watching the house. I heard someone on the rocks last night. I can't let them find you. I won't. The final photo in the stack made Maren sob out loud, the sound echoing up the tower shaft. It showed Eleanor leaning over a car seat, kissing a sleeping baby's forehead. Tears streaked Eleanor's face. On the back, the handwriting was shaky, broken. Maren, 2 weeks old, March 24th, 1987. This is the last time I'll hold you. I'm taking you somewhere safe, somewhere they can't reach you. I'm leaving the compass with you so you'll find your way back when it's time. Forgive me, my beautiful girl. I love you more than life. This is the only way to save you." Maren pressed the photo to her chest and wept, great gasping sobs that shook her whole body. Her mother hadn't abandoned her out of cruelty or indifference. Eleanor had been protecting her, had given her up to save her life, had spent the next 28 years alone in this lighthouse, waiting, hoping, praying that someday Maren would be safe enough to come back. And she died before that day came. Died alone, never knowing if Maren had survived, if she'd turned out okay, if she'd ever forgive the choice that had shattered them both. Maren didn't know how long she sat there crying. The cold stone eventually seeped through her jeans, forcing her to move. She carefully packed the photos and birth certificate back into the metal box and placed it in her backpack. These were hers now. Proof of love. Proof that she'd mattered to someone. She wiped her face roughly and stood, legs shaky. She'd come this far. She had to keep going, had to see what else Eleanor had left for her. She climbed higher. The 9th alcove held more newspaper clippings, but these were different. Articles about the continued search for the Ashford paintings, theories about where they'd gone, speculation that they'd been smuggled out of the country, sold to private collectors, destroyed. Art experts lamenting the loss of masterpieces that would never be recovered. The 10th alcove was empty except for a handwritten note. "They think the paintings are gone forever. They're wrong. James hid them before they killed him. He told me where. I retrieved them. I've kept them safe. For you, Maren, for when you're ready." Maren's heart started hammering against her ribs. The paintings. The $120 million collection. Eleanor had them, had hidden them, had kept them sealed in this tower for 37 years. What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. She climbed faster now, urgency pushing through exhaustion. The staircase narrowed as it spiraled higher. She counted another 40 steps before the stairs ended at a final door. This one wasn't steel, it was heavy wood, old but well maintained, with the same circular compass lock. Maren pressed her compass into the indent, turned it, heard the click. The door swung inward. Beyond was a circular room that took up the entire top of the lighthouse. Windows ringed the space, offering a 360-degree view of the ocean, the rocky coastline, the endless grey-blue expanse of water and sky. The room was pristine, climate-controlled, just as she'd suspected. Soft lights flickered on automatically as she stepped inside, responding to motion sensors. The walls were lined with wooden crates, large ones, the kind museums used for transporting valuable artwork. Each crate was marked with stamps and dates, gallery markings, shipping labels, insurance codes. Maren counted them quickly. 37 crates total. In the center of the room stood a small desk, and on that desk a single envelope with her name written across it in Eleanor's elegant script. Maren! Her hands shook so badly she could barely open it. Inside were several pages covered in her mother's handwriting. She sank into the desk chair and began to read. "My dearest Maren, if you're reading this, then you found your way home. You opened the doors I sealed for you. You climbed the stairs I filled with our story. And now you're here, in the place where I've kept the most dangerous secret of my life, our life. I don't know how old you are as you read this. I don't know if you're 20 or 40 or somewhere in between. I don't know if you've had a good life, if you've been loved, if you've been safe. Not knowing has been the hardest part of all of this, harder than the loneliness, harder than the fear. But I need you to understand why I did what I did. Your father, James, was a good man, the best man I ever knew. He worked as an insurance investigator for Prescott and Lane, one of the biggest firms in Boston. In early 1986, they assigned him to evaluate the Ashford Museum's security systems. The museum was planning a major renovation and needed updated insurance coverage. James spent months there, studying their collection, their procedures, their vulnerabilities. He fell in love with the art. would come home and tell me about the Monet water lilies, the Rembrandt portraits, the Vermeer that was so small and perfect it made him want to cry. But he noticed things. Irregularities in the provenance documentation, gaps in the security protocols. He started asking questions, and that's when they approached him. A group of wealthy collectors, men with power and resources beyond imagination. They wanted those paintings. Not to sell. They already had more money than they could spend. They wanted to own beauty that no one else could have, to possess what was priceless. They offered James $2 million to help them, to look the other way during the heist, to provide the codes and schedules they needed. He refused, and that's when everything went wrong. They framed him, made it look like he was the mastermind behind the theft. The heist happened exactly as he'd warned his superiors it would, but no one listened. All the evidence pointed to him, his access codes, his security reports, his fingerprints in the wrong places. James knew he was going to prison for a crime he didn't commit. Or worse, he knew these men wouldn't let him testify, wouldn't let him expose them. Before they killed him, he managed to do something incredible. He found where they'd hidden the paintings in a warehouse in South Boston. He moved them, hid them somewhere safe, and he told me where. By the time he died, and Marin, they absolutely murdered him, made it look like suicide, but I know better. I was already pregnant with you, already terrified, already being watched. I retrieved the paintings 3 weeks after your birth. It was the most dangerous thing I've ever done. I hired a moving truck, drove to the location James had described in his final letter to me, and loaded 37 crates while looking over my shoulder for men who would kill me without hesitation. I brought them here, to the Lighthouse, to the only place I knew how to make truly safe. And then I had to make the most impossible choice of my life. These men, they knew James had moved the paintings. They knew I might know where. They were watching me, waiting for me to lead them to the collection. As long as I had you, you were leverage. They could threaten you, hurt you, use you to make me talk, and I couldn't let that happen. So I took you to Portland General Hospital in the middle of the night. I left you in the emergency room where I knew you'd be found immediately, kept safe, cared for. I left the compass with you, the key to everything, hidden in plain sight. No one would know what it meant. No one but you when the time came. I reported myself missing to make them think I'd fled. Let them believe I'd run away in grief and fear. I let them think the paintings were gone forever, sold off, scattered. And then I sealed this tower. I had a security company install that steel door with its compass lock. I filled the staircase with our story. I waited. I waited for you to grow up, to be safe, to be old enough to protect yourself, to find your way back. I'm sorry I couldn't raise you. I'm sorry I couldn't watch you grow, couldn't teach you things, couldn't be the mother you deserved. But I could give you this, the truth, the proof of your father's innocence. And yes, a fortune in art that belongs to the world, but will ensure you're taken care of when you return it. Because you must return it, Marin. These paintings aren't ours to keep. They belong in museums where people can see them, experience them, be moved by them. Your father died protecting them. I gave you up to keep them safe. But the men who wanted them are still out there, still dangerous, still waiting. Be careful who you trust. Document everything. Contact the FBI, not local police. These men have reach. I love you. I have always loved you. Every single day of your life, I've thought about you, wondered about you, prayed for you. You are my daughter. You are James Whitmore's daughter. You come from love and sacrifice and courage. Use this gift wisely. Live the life we couldn't. With all my heart, your mother, Eleanor. Marin read the letter 3 times before she could move. Tears dripped onto the paper, smudging the ink. She carefully folded it and placed it in her backpack with the photos and birth certificate. Then she stood and walked to the first crate. Her hands shook as she found a crowbar in the corner. Eleanor had left tools, had prepared for this moment. She carefully pried open the first crate, pulled back layers of protective wrapping. And there it was, a painting that took her breath away. A woman in a garden, impressionist style, flowers blooming in impossible colors. She checked the small placard attached to the crate. Claude Monet, Le Jardin de Giverny, 1899. Estimated current value, $12 million. Marin stumbled back, pressed her hand to her mouth. She moved to the next crate, pried it open. A Rembrandt self-portrait, the artist's eyes following her across centuries. Estimated value, $18 million. Another crate, a Vermeer so small and perfect it seemed to glow in the soft light. Girl reading a letter by an open window, 1657. Estimated value, $20 million. She opened 5 more. Picasso, Van Gogh, Degas, Renoir, Cézanne. Each one a masterpiece, each one thought lost forever, each one worth more money than she could comprehend. She was standing in the middle of $120 million in stolen art. No. She stopped herself. $120 million in 1986. Art appreciated. These pieces, lost for 37 years, rediscovered. The value would be astronomical now. She pulled out her phone, hand shaking, and snapped photos of the plaques. Did rough mental math based on what she knew about art prices from news articles over the years. The collection was worth at least $350 million, possibly more. Eleanor had given up everything to protect $350 million in art, had given up her daughter. Marin sank to the floor, surrounded by crates of priceless beauty, and tried to process what this meant, what she was supposed to do, how she could possibly... Footsteps. On the spiral staircase. Marin's head snapped up. Someone was climbing, multiple someones from the sound of it, different weights, different rhythms. She scrambled to her feet, heart hammering, looked around frantically. There was nowhere to hide. The room was circular, open, the crates providing no cover. The footsteps grew closer. Marin grabbed the crowbar, held it in both hands, positioned herself behind the desk. 3 men emerged from the stairwell, spreading out as they entered the room. They were in their 50s or 60s, well-dressed in expensive coats and polished shoes. Not the kind of men you'd expect to find climbing a lighthouse tower. The one in the middle smiled. It was a cold smile, predatory. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice smooth and cultured. "Or do you prefer Miss Cole? I've been watching you use both names." Marin tightened her grip on the crowbar. "Who are you?" "My name is Marcus Thorne. These are my associates, David and Paul." He gestured casually to the men flanking him. "We've been waiting a very long time for someone to open this tower, 37 years to be exact. You're the ones who killed my father." Marcus's smile widened. "Your father made unfortunate choices. He could have been wealthy, could have lived, but he chose principle over pragmatism." He looked around the room at the crates, his eyes gleaming. "And now, here we are. The lost Ashford collection, perfectly preserved, right where we always suspected Eleanor had hidden it." "You can't have them," Marin said, her voice steadier than she felt. "These paintings belong in museums. They belong to the world." "How noble," Marcus said, taking a step closer. "You sound just like your mother. She said almost the exact same thing when we found her 10 years ago." Marin's blood turned to ice. "What?" "Oh, Eleanor didn't die of natural causes, dear girl. We found her. Tried to make her tell us how to open the tower. She refused. Quite bravely, actually. Died protecting her secrets." He shrugged. "We made it look like illness. No one questioned a lonely old woman dying in isolation." Rage flooded through Marin, hot and consuming. "You murdered her. We protected our investment. She was an obstacle. Just as you'll be an obstacle if you don't cooperate." He smiled again. "But you seem smarter than your parents. Surely you understand that you can't keep this collection. The moment you try to return it, you'll have questions to answer. Criminal investigations, tax implications. You'll spend years in legal battles. Whereas if you simply walk away," David added from the left, "let us handle the collection. We can ensure you're comfortable. $1 million, cash, no questions asked." $2 million, Paul offered from the right, to be generous. Marcus shot them both an annoyed look, then focused back on Marin. "The point is, we're offering you a way out. Your parents died for nothing. Don't make the same mistake." Marin's mind raced. She was trapped at the top of a lighthouse with 3 men who had killed her parents. Men who had been watching, waiting, who had let her open the tower and do the hard work. Who had killed Eleanor 10 years ago, meaning Eleanor had never known if Marin had survived, if she'd grown up safe, if she'd ever find this place. Her mother had died still protecting her, still keeping the secret. "You're right about one thing," Marin said carefully, her fingers white-knuckled on the crowbar. "I can't keep this collection." Marcus smiled, thinking he'd won. A wise choice. "But I'm not giving it to you either." She pulled out her phone. "I've already photographed everything, documented it all, and I've got cell service up here." She held up the phone so they could see the signal bars. "One call to the FBI and this whole room becomes a crime scene." The three men exchanged glances. "You're bluffing," Marcus said, but his voice had lost its smoothness. "Am I?" Marin's thumb hovered over the screen. "My mother spent 28 years waiting for me to do the right thing, to finish what my father started, to make their sacrifices mean something." Her voice cracked. "They died protecting this art, protecting the truth. I'm not letting that be for nothing." "If you make that call," Marcus said quietly, dangerously, "you won't leave this lighthouse alive." "Maybe not," Marin agreed. "But you won't either. Not with the art. The FBI will seal this place within hours. You'll have nothing." The standoff stretched, tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Marin's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. She was one woman with a crowbar facing three men who had already proven they were willing to kill. But she was also Eleanor's daughter, James's daughter, and she'd be damned if she'd let them win. The silence in the circular tower room stretched like a wire pulled too tight, ready to snap. Marcus Thorne's eyes had gone cold, calculating. He was weighing options, measuring risks, deciding whether killing Marin right now was worth the potential consequences. Marin's thumb trembled over her phone screen. She wasn't bluffing about the signal, she could see the bars, but she was absolutely bluffing about having already documented everything. She'd taken maybe 5 photos before they arrived. Not nearly enough. Not enough to prove what was here or to implicate these men. But they didn't know that. "You're making a mistake," Marcus said, his voice dropping to something darker, more threatening. "A fatal one." "Maybe," Marin replied, forcing her voice steady, "but at least it'll be my mistake, not yours." Marcus took a step forward. David and Paul moved with him, closing the circle. Marin backed against the window, the cold glass pressing against her shoulders. $350 million in art surrounded her, and all she could think about was that her mother had died in a situation probably very much like this one. Alone, trapped, facing men who valued money over human life. But Eleanor hadn't had a phone. Hadn't had the threat of immediate exposure. Marin's finger moved toward the dial screen. "Last chance. Walk away now, or I make the call." "If you do," Marcus said quietly, "we'll tell them you stole the art, that you killed Eleanor to get access to it. Who do you think they'll believe? 3 respected businessmen and art collectors, or a waitress with no history, no family, no credibility?" He had a point. Marin felt it like a punch to the gut. She had no proof these men had done anything, no evidence they'd killed her parents. It would be her word against theirs, and in that fight she'd lose. Unless she could get out of here, get to someone who could help, document everything properly before these men could disappear the collection. She glanced toward the stairwell, 20 feet away. They were between her and the only exit. "I can see you thinking," Marcus said, amused now. "You're wondering if you can run. You can't. David used to run marathons. Paul did boxing at Harvard. You wouldn't make it 10 steps. Marin's mind raced. The windows behind her looked out over the ocean, a 70-foot drop to rocks and crashing waves below. The spiral staircase was blocked. The phone was her only weapon, and even that was suspect. She was trapped. And then she heard it, faint at first, growing louder. An engine, multiple engines. Marcus heard it too. His head turned sharply toward the windows. The sound grew into a rumble, then a roar. Motorcycles, lots of them. Marin risked a glance over her shoulder through the window. Down below, a convoy of vehicles was pulling up to the lighthouse. Trucks, cars, and at least a dozen motorcycles. People were climbing out, gathering, pointing up at the tower. "What the hell?" David muttered. Maren's heart leaped. She didn't know who they were, but they were witnesses. A crowd, safety in numbers. Marcus's expression turned furious. "Who did you call?" "I didn't," Maren said truthfully, "but someone knows I'm here." She'd told no one she was coming back to the lighthouse this morning, had told no one about what she'd found, but someone had noticed, someone had seen. Marcus pulled out his own phone, made a quick call. "We've got a situation, multiple civilians on site. No, we can't," he cursed. "Fine, we're leaving, but this isn't over." He turned to Maren, his face a mask of cold rage. "You just made powerful enemies. We'll be watching. And the moment you try to move that art, the moment you try to go public, we'll bury you so deep no one will ever find you." "Get out," Maren said, her voice shaking but firm. "Get out of my lighthouse." The three men moved toward the stairwell. Marcus paused at the threshold. "Your mother thought she was so clever, hiding you away, sealing this tower. But all she did was delay the inevitable. We always get what we want, Miss Whitmore. Always." Then they were gone, footsteps echoing down the spiral stairs. Maren's legs gave out. She slid down the wall, sat hard on the floor, her whole body trembling with adrenaline and fear. She'd survived. Somehow, impossibly, she'd survived. The sound of footsteps returned, lighter this time, faster. A woman's voice called up. "Hello? Is someone up there? Are you okay?" Maren forced herself to stand, legs shaky. "I'm here. I'm okay." A woman emerged from the stairwell, 60s maybe, with steel-grey hair and sharp eyes that swept the room, taking in everything. The crates, Maren's pale face, the crowbar still clutched in her hand. "I'm Ruth Calloway," the woman said. "I live about 3 miles down the coast. I was Eleanor Whitmore's friend, her only friend really these last years." She stepped closer, her expression softening. "You must be Maren." Maren's breath caught. "How did you know?" "Because you look exactly like your mother did at your age, and because Eleanor told me you'd come eventually, that when the tower finally opened, it would mean you'd found your way home." Ruth's eyes glistened. "I've been watching this lighthouse every day for 7 years, waiting for you." "The men who just left." "I saw them," Ruth said grimly. "That's why I called everyone I could think of. Told them something was wrong at the lighthouse. The folks here, they remember Eleanor. Some of them feel guilty about how she died alone. They came when I asked." Maren moved to the window, looked down. The crowd had grown, maybe 40 people now, standing in clusters looking up at the tower. She saw older couples, younger families, fishermen still in their work clothes. An entire community that had failed Eleanor but wasn't going to fail her daughter. "We need to call the police," Maren said. "The FBI, those men, they killed my parents. They killed Eleanor." Ruth's jaw tightened. "I know. Or at least I suspected. Eleanor died so suddenly and she'd been healthy just weeks before, but there was no autopsy. The local doctor signed off on natural causes." She paused. "The local police won't help you, honey. Half of them are in someone's pocket. This is a small town. Money talks." "Then what do I do?" Ruth pulled out her own phone. "My nephew Derek is a state police officer. Good man. Honest. He's been trying to investigate Eleanor's death for years, but never had evidence. If you've got proof of what's up here, if you can connect these men to your parents—" "I have letters," Maren said quickly. "Journals, photos, everything Eleanor left. It's all downstairs in the cottage. Then we gather it all, document everything in this tower, and we call Derek. He'll know who to contact at the federal level." Ruth looked around at the crates again, her expression awed. "Is this really the Ashford collection?" 37 paintings, worth over $350 million now, probably. Ruth let out a low whistle. "Eleanor kept this secret for 28 years, gave up her own child to protect it." She shook her head. "That woman was the bravest person I ever knew." Maren's throat tightened. "I wish I'd known her." "She knew you, honey. Every choice she made was about you, about keeping you safe until you were strong enough to handle the truth." Ruth gripped Maren's shoulder. "And you are. You faced down 3 killers and lived. Eleanor would be so proud." They spent the next hour photographing everything in the tower. Ruth proved surprisingly tech-savvy, using her tablet to take detailed shots of each painting, each placard, each piece of documentation Eleanor had left. Maren worked methodically through the crates, creating an inventory. Monet, Rembrandt, Vermeer, Picasso, Van Gogh, Degas, Renoir, Cézanne, Gauguin, Toulouse-Lautrec. Name after name that belonged in art history textbooks, not sealed in a lighthouse tower on the coast of Maine. By the time they finished, the crowd below had thinned but not disappeared. A core group of about 15 people remained, keeping watch. Ruth explained they'd formed a rotation. Someone would be here 24 hours a day until this situation was resolved. "We failed Eleanor," an old fisherman named Tom said when Maren came down from the tower. "We knew something was wrong, knew she was scared those last years, but we minded our own business, figured it wasn't our place." He looked ashamed. "We won't make that mistake twice." Derek Calloway arrived just before sunset, a solid man in his 30s with his aunt's sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner that immediately made Maren feel safer. He wore plain clothes, jeans, flannel shirt, baseball cap, but carried himself with the authority of someone used to being in charge. Ruth had filled him in on the phone, but his expression when he climbed to the tower and saw the collection was one of pure shock. "Jesus," he breathed, standing among the crates. "This is real. This is actually real." "Very real," Maren confirmed. "And 3 men tried to take it by force this morning. Ruth scared them off, but they'll be back." Derek pulled out a notebook, all business now. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." So Maren did. She walked him through the inheritance, finding Eleanor's journals, opening the tower, discovering the truth about her parents, and finally the confrontation with Marcus Thorne and his associates. Derek took notes, asked sharp questions, occasionally stopped her to clarify details. When she finished, he sat back against the desk, processing. "Okay, here's what we're dealing with. If these men killed James Whitmore in 1987 and Eleanor in 2015, the statute of limitations hasn't run out on Eleanor's murder. That's still an active crime. What about the art theft? No statute of limitations on art theft over $5,000. These paintings were stolen in 1986. Even 37 years later, that's still prosecutable." He flipped through his notes. "But proving Marcus Thorne and his people were involved is going to be hard. We need evidence linking them to the original theft and the murders. Eleanor's journals might have names, dates, which will help, but it's not enough. We need something more concrete." Derek thought for a moment. "I know someone. FBI Art Crimes Division in Boston. Agent Sarah Bennett. She's been tracking stolen art for 20 years. If anyone can help us build a case, it's her." "Can we trust her?" Derek met Maren's eyes. "Yes, she's clean. I've worked with her on 2 other cases. She doesn't play games and she doesn't take bribes." "Then call her," Maren said. "Please." Derek made the call right there, putting it on speaker so Maren could hear. Sarah Bennett answered on the 3rd ring, her voice professional and crisp. "Agent Bennett. Sarah, it's Derek Calloway, Maine State Police. I need your help with something big." "How big?" "The Ashford Museum collection big." There was a long silence. Then, carefully, "Derek, that collection has been missing for 37 years. If this is a joke..." "It's not. I'm standing in a lighthouse tower looking at 37 crates of paintings. Monet, Rembrandt, Vermeer, all of it. All perfectly preserved." Another silence, longer this time. "Send me photos, everything, right now." Derek started forwarding the images they'd taken. Maren could hear clicking on the other end of the line, rapid typing. "My God," Sarah finally said, her voice tight with emotion. "These look authentic. The crating alone. These are the original museum transport crates. We've been looking for these for decades." "There's more," Derek said. "We have information about who stole them, about murders connected to the theft, about a cover-up that goes back almost 40 years. Who else knows about this?" "Right now, just us, my aunt, and about 15 townspeople keeping watch on the lighthouse. Oh, and the 3 men who tried to steal the collection this morning. What? Sarah's voice sharpened. Are they in custody? No. They left when witnesses showed up, but they threatened the woman who owns the lighthouse, told her they'd bury her if she went public. The woman who owns, Derek, who found these paintings? Derek looked at Maren, gestured for her to speak. I did, Maren said. My name is Maren Cole, or Maren Whitmore, actually. I inherited the lighthouse from my mother, Eleanor Whitmore. She hid the collection here after my father, James Whitmore, was murdered for refusing to help steal it. The silence on the other end stretched so long Maren thought the connection had dropped. James Whitmore, Sarah finally said, the insurance investigator. He was suspected of involvement in the Ashford theft but died before we could prosecute. We always thought... She stopped. He was innocent. Completely. The real thieves framed him, then killed him when he wouldn't cooperate. My mother spent 28 years protecting the collection and protecting me. How old are you, Miss Whitmore? 28. I was born 3 weeks before the theft. More silence as Sarah processed this. Okay, here's what needs to happen. Do not move those paintings. Do not let anyone else into that tower. I'm mobilizing a team right now. We'll be there by morning with forensics, authentication experts, and security. Derek, can you hold the site until then? We've got local volunteers keeping watch. I'll coordinate with the county sheriff for official presence. No, Sarah said sharply. No local law enforcement. If there's been a cover-up for this long, we don't know who's compromised. Just you and the volunteers until my team arrives. Can you do that? Derek glanced at Maren, who nodded. We can do that. Miss Whitmore, Sarah said, her tone gentler now. I need you to understand something. When word gets out about this discovery, your life is going to change dramatically. There will be media attention, legal proceedings, people trying to claim the art or claim you. It's going to be overwhelming. I know, Maren said quietly, but my parents died protecting the truth. I'm not going to hide it now. Good. We'll talk more when I arrive. In the meantime, stay safe. And Derek, watch your back. If these men have been killing to protect their secret for this long, they're not going to stop now. The call ended. Derek immediately started making more calls, coordinating security, arranging for the lighthouse to be secured overnight. Ruth organized the volunteers into shifts. Tom the fisherman offered to bring camping chairs and thermoses of coffee. Someone else promised to bring portable lights. By nightfall, the lighthouse looked like a small encampment. 15 people stationed around the property, some in cars, some on foot, all keeping watch. Derek had positioned himself in the keeper's cottage where he could see anyone approaching the tower entrance. Maren should have felt safe, should have felt relief that help was coming, that the FBI was involved, that she wasn't alone in this anymore. But she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She stood at the cottage window, looking out into the darkness beyond the volunteer perimeter. Somewhere out there, Marcus Thorne and his associates were planning their next move. They'd killed twice before to protect their secret, maybe more than twice. Who knew how many people had gotten too close over the years? You should eat something, Ruth said, appearing beside her with a sandwich. You haven't eaten all day. Maren took it mechanically, not really tasting it. What if they come back tonight? What if they bring more people? We can't fight off an armed assault. They won't come tonight, Ruth said confidently. Too many witnesses now. Too much attention. They'll wait, watch, try to find a quieter moment. How do you know? Because that's what they did with Eleanor. They waited years, watched her, and when they finally made their move, it was quiet, made it look natural. These men, they're patient. They've been waiting 37 years for this collection. They'll wait a little longer if it means getting away clean. Maren wanted to feel reassured, but she couldn't. She kept thinking about Eleanor, dying alone, probably knowing these men had found her but unable to stop them. Had Eleanor fought? Had she been scared? Had she thought about Maren in those final moments? She talked about you, Ruth said softly, as if reading Maren's thoughts. In the last few years especially, she'd sit out on the lighthouse gallery on clear nights and talk about her daughter, wonder what you looked like. Wonder if you were happy, if you'd forgiven her. I never knew enough to be angry, Marin said, her voice cracking. I spent my whole life thinking I'd been abandoned by someone who didn't want me. Now I find out my mother loved me so much she gave me up to save me. How do I process that? One day at a time, honey. One day at a time. The night passed slowly. Marin dozed fitfully on the cottage couch, jerking awake at every sound. Derek stayed alert at the window, coffee in hand, phone charging beside him. The volunteers rotated shifts, fresh people arriving every few hours to replace tired ones. Nothing happened. No attacks, no suspicious vehicles, just the steady crash of waves and the occasional call of nightbirds. But Marin felt it. The waiting, the watching, the sense that something was building toward an inevitable confrontation. Sarah Bennett arrived at dawn with a convoy that looked like something from a movie. 4 black SUVs, 2 panel vans, and a truck filled with equipment. She stepped out of the lead vehicle, a woman in her 40s with short brown hair and eyes that missed nothing. She was flanked by a team of 8 agents, all business, all armed. Miss Whitmore? She approached Marin with an outstretched hand. Agent Sarah Bennett, thank you for securing the site. Marin shook her hand, impressed by the firm grip, the direct gaze. This was someone who got things done. Let's see what we're dealing with, Sarah said. They climbed the tower together, Sarah's team spreading out to photograph, document, secure. When Sarah saw the first painting, the Monet, she stopped completely, stared, and Marin saw her throat work as she swallowed emotion. I've been hunting this collection since I joined the Bureau 15 years ago, Sarah said quietly. Every agent who's worked art crimes has dreamed of finding it. And here it is, in a lighthouse in Maine. She turned to Marin. Your mother was either the bravest woman I've never met or the craziest. Maybe both, Marin said. Sarah spent 3 hours examining the collection, consulting with experts on video calls, verifying authenticity. Every painting checked out. Every single one was exactly what the documentation claimed. Preliminary estimate, Sarah finally said. We're looking at $360 million, possibly more at auction, but these aren't going to auction. They're going back to their rightful owners. The museums. The Ashford Museum is gone, closed in 2003 due to bankruptcy after the theft. But most of their collection was insured. The insurance companies own the paintings now, technically, though there will be legal battles about that for years. Sarah paused. But there's a finder's fee. Standard practice is 10% of recovered value for major art finds. Marin did the math quickly. $36 million, life-changing money, never work again money. I don't want it, she said. Sarah blinked. Excuse me? I don't want the money, or I want enough to live on, to be stable. But the rest should go to causes my parents would have supported. Art education, programs for foster kids. Marin swallowed hard. My mother gave up everything for this art. I'm not going to profit from her sacrifice. Sarah studied her for a long moment. You really are Eleanor's daughter. Over the next week, the lighthouse transformed into a crime scene and archaeological dig combined. FBI forensic teams scoured every inch, collecting evidence, documenting everything. Art experts from around the world arrived to authenticate and catalogue the paintings. News crews tried to get close but were kept at a distance by FBI security. The story broke on day 3. Lost art collection found after 37 years. Within hours, it was international news. Marin's face, grainy photos taken with long lenses from beyond the FBI perimeter, appeared on news sites around the world. Daughter of accused thief discovers parents were heroes, one headline read. Lighthouse keeper's legacy, the mother who gave up everything to protect art and child. The coverage was overwhelming, but Sarah's team shielded Marin from most of it. They set up a secure perimeter, controlled access, kept the media circus at bay. But they couldn't stop everything. On day 5, Marin received a letter. No return address, delivered through channels that shouldn't have been accessible. Inside was a single sentence in elegant script. Your parents should have taken the money. Last chance. Walk away. She showed it to Sarah, who immediately increased security. "They're getting desperate," Sarah said. "That's good. Desperate people make mistakes." "Or desperate people do desperate things," Derek added grimly. He'd been assigned as Maren's personal protection, staying close any time she left the cottage. Sarah had been building her case methodically. Eleanor's journals provided names: Marcus Thorne, David Prescott, Paul Ashford. All three men were connected to the original museum. All three had been investigated in 1987 but never charged. All three had become wealthy art collectors in the years since, their fortunes built on questionable foundations. "We're going to arrest them," Sarah told Maren on day 7. "We have enough evidence to bring them in for questioning about the original theft. The murder charges will be harder to prove without physical evidence, but we're working on it." "When?" "Tomorrow, coordinated raids at 6 a.m. all three locations simultaneously." Sarah paused. "They're going to know it was you who exposed them." "Good," Maren said. "I want them to know." But that night, everything went wrong. Maren was asleep in the cottage, Derek stationed outside her door, FBI agents patrolling the grounds. She woke to shouting, the smell of smoke, and the sound of breaking glass. She stumbled out of bed, disoriented. Derek burst through the door. "Fire! The tower's on fire!" They ran outside. Flames were climbing the tower's exterior, fed by accelerant that must have been poured while the agents were on rotation change. The security cameras had been disabled. Someone had gotten through. "The paintings!" Maren screamed. "The tower is fireproof!" Sarah shouted, running toward them with a fire extinguisher. "Steel door, climate-controlled, sealed. The paintings are safe, but this is a distraction." "From what?" Derek demanded. The answer came in the form of gunfire. 3 shots, rapid succession from the direction of the access road. The FBI agents scattered, drew weapons, returned fire. Through the smoke and chaos, Maren saw them. Marcus, David, and Paul, emerging from the darkness with guns raised. They weren't trying to be subtle anymore. They were making their last, desperate play. "Get her inside!" Sarah screamed. Derek grabbed Maren, pulled her toward the cottage. More gunshots. Someone screamed. The world became a blur of smoke and sound and terror. And then, cutting through it all, a different sound. Sirens. Lots of them. The cavalry had arrived. State police vehicles flooded the Lighthouse grounds, their lights strobing red and blue across the smoke-filled darkness. Behind them came county sheriff cars, then more FBI vehicles. Derek had called in every favor, triggered every emergency protocol. Within minutes, the Lighthouse property was swarming with law enforcement. Marcus Thorne and his associates found themselves surrounded, outgunned, trapped between the ocean and 24 officers with weapons drawn. The firefight lasted less than 30 seconds before they surrendered, throwing down their guns and raising their hands. Maren watched from the cottage window as FBI agents cuffed all 3 men and led them toward separate vehicles. Marcus caught her eye as he passed, his expression twisted with rage and something else, disbelief. He'd been so certain he'd win, so certain that money and power would prevail over one woman with a compass and a conscience. He'd been wrong. Sarah appeared in the doorway, soot on her face and a cut above her eyebrow. "You okay?" Maren nodded, though she was shaking. "The paintings?" "Safe. The tower's exterior took damage, but the sealed room is intact. They knew they couldn't get inside, so they tried to destroy it, tried to burn the evidence." Sarah's jaw tightened. They just added arson and attempted destruction of cultural artifacts to their charges. Along with attempted murder, they shot at federal agents. "Is everyone okay?" "Minor injuries. Agent Torres took a graze to the shoulder, but he'll be fine. The medics are with him now." Sarah sat down heavily in the chair across from Maren. "We got them, all 3, and when we searched their vehicles, we found enough evidence to bury them. Documents, communications, even a laptop with files about the original heist. They kept records. Arrogant men always do. They wanted proof of their cleverness." Sarah shook her head. Marcus Thorne had a file on his computer called Ashford Acquisition. Detailed notes about planning the theft, framing your father, even a timeline of Eleanor's movements in her final months. Maren's stomach churned. He documented killing my mother. Not explicitly, but close enough. References to neutralizing the Lighthouse problem dated 2015. Combined with Eleanor's autopsy records and witness testimony, Ruth saw strange cars around the property that year. We can build a murder case. Sarah leaned forward. Your parents are going to get justice, Marin. Finally. The fire department extinguished the tower blaze within an hour. The damage was mostly cosmetic: scorched stone, melted paint, broken windows on the lower levels. But the sealed room at the top remained pristine, protected by Eleanor's careful engineering and the steel door that had guarded secrets for nearly 3 decades. As dawn broke grey and cold over Ravens Point, Marin climbed the spiral staircase one more time. FBI agents were everywhere now, cataloguing, photographing, securing. But they let her through, recognizing that this was more than a crime scene to her. This was her mother's legacy, her father's sacrifice, her own origin story written in hidden paintings and sealed doors. She stood in the circular room surrounded by the crated masterpieces and felt the weight of everything that had happened. Her parents had died protecting this art, protecting her, protecting the truth. Eleanor had lived in isolation for 28 years, watching the ocean, waiting for a daughter who might never come, hoping that somehow the sacrifice would mean something. And now it did. Over the next 3 weeks, the investigation expanded into something unprecedented. Marcus Thorne, David Prescott, and Paul Ashford were formally charged with conspiracy to commit theft, racketeering, murder, attempted murder, and a dozen other crimes spanning 4 decades. Their arrest triggered a cascade of revelations. Bank records showed payments to corrupt officials who'd helped cover up the original theft. Communications revealed a network of wealthy collectors who'd knowingly bought stolen art over the years. The investigation spread to 6 states and 3 countries, but it was Eleanor's journals that provided the most damning evidence. She'd documented everything: dates, times, snippets of overheard conversations from the days when Marcus and his associates had stalked her, trying to find where she'd hidden the collection. She'd even recorded their threats, their attempts to bribe her, their escalating anger when she refused to cooperate. The journals also revealed something else. Eleanor had been sick in her final months, but not with the illness the death certificate claimed. She'd been healthy until 3 days before she died, when she'd written in her journal about a visit from old ghosts and feeling suddenly violently ill. An exhumation order was issued. Eleanor's body was examined by forensic experts. They found traces of thallium poisoning, a slow-acting toxin that mimicked natural illness. Marcus Thorne's credit card records showed a purchase from a chemical supply company 4 months before Eleanor's death. The murder case solidified. While the criminal proceedings churned forward, the art world exploded with excitement. Every museum, every gallery, every art historian on the planet wanted to see the recovered Ashford collection. Authentication teams worked around the clock, verifying each piece with technology that hadn't existed in 1986. The Monet was authenticated using paint analysis and X-ray fluorescence. The Rembrandt was verified through canvas weave patterns and aging techniques. The Vermeer, the smallest and most precious of the collection, was confirmed through pigment testing and comparison with other known works. Every single painting was genuine. Dr. Patricia Morrow, head of authentication for the Smithsonian, spent 3 days examining the collection. When she finished, she called Marin into the tower room and said simply, "Your mother was an exceptional conservator. These paintings are in better condition now than they were when they were stolen. She maintained humidity, temperature, protection from light, everything perfectly. It's remarkable." "She loved art," Marin said softly. "My father taught her. She wanted to honor what he'd tried to protect." Dr. Morrow nodded. "She succeeded. These pieces will hang in museums for centuries more because of her care." The question of ownership proved complex. The Ashford Museum no longer existed, but the insurance companies that had paid out claims in 1987 technically owned the recovered art. However, several museums filed claims arguing they should house the collection. Legal battles loomed. Sarah Bennett helped Marin navigate the complications. "You're entitled to a finder's fee regardless of who ultimately gets the paintings," she explained. "Standard practice is 10%, but given the circumstances, your parents' sacrifice, Eleanor's preservation efforts, there's precedent for higher compensation." "I don't want to fight over money while my parents' murderers are on trial," Marin said. "Can we settle this?" Sarah made calls. Negotiations happened. Within 2 weeks, an agreement was reached. The insurance companies would pay Marin a finder's fee of $32 million, just under 10% of the collection's appraised value of $367 million. In exchange, Marin agreed not to contest the insurance company's ownership claims. But there was a condition Marin insisted on. $5 million of her fee would go toward establishing the Eleanor and James Whitmore Foundation, dedicated to art education and support for children in foster care. The foundation would also fund a permanent exhibit about the Ashford theft and recovery, ensuring her parents' story would be told. The museums agreed. The insurance companies agreed. Everyone agreed because Marin Cole, Marin Whitmore, had become a symbol of something people desperately wanted to believe in: that truth could triumph over corruption, that sacrifice could have meaning, that one person's courage could change everything. The trial of Marcus Thorne and his co-conspirators began on a cold morning in February, 8 months after Marin had first opened the steel door in the Lighthouse Tower. The federal courthouse in Portland was packed, media credentials exhausted within hours of being made available. This was the trial of the decade: art theft, murder, conspiracy, and a story that felt pulled from a thriller novel but was devastatingly real. Marin sat in the front row every day, flanked by Ruth and Derek. She listened as prosecutors laid out the evidence: the planning documents, the financial records, Eleanor's journals, forensic reports about the thallium poisoning. She watched as witness after witness testified to Marcus Thorne's obsession with the Ashford collection, his rage when James Whitmore refused to cooperate, his ruthless pursuit of Eleanor for nearly 3 decades. The defense tried to paint Marcus and his associates as legitimate art collectors who'd been unfairly targeted. They claimed Eleanor had died of natural causes, that the thallium could have come from anywhere, that the documents on Marcus's computer were merely historical research about a famous heist. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, guilty on all counts. Marcus Thorne was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole for the murder of Eleanor Whitmore, plus consecutive sentences for conspiracy, racketeering, and attempted murder of federal agents. David Prescott and Paul Ashford received similar sentences. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, delivered the verdict with barely concealed anger. "You murdered 2 innocent people," she said, looking directly at Marcus. "You destroyed a family. You deprived a child of her parents. And you did it all for greed, for the selfish desire to possess beauty that should have belonged to the world. You will spend the rest of your lives in prison, and it is less than you deserve." Marin didn't feel triumph when the verdict was read. She felt exhausted relief. Her parents' names had been cleared. James Whitmore, the man accused of masterminding the Ashford heist, was officially recognized as a hero who died trying to stop it. Eleanor Whitmore, the reclusive lighthouse keeper who died alone, was acknowledged as a guardian who'd protected priceless art for nearly 3 decades while sacrificing everything. The media coverage after the trial was intense but respectful. Marin gave one interview to a journalist from the New York Times who'd covered the original Ashford theft in 1986. She spoke about Eleanor and James, about growing up not knowing where she came from, about finding the compass and the lighthouse and the truth. "My mother gave me up to save my life," Marin said into the camera. "She lived alone for 28 years, waiting for me, hoping I'd be safe. I can't get those years back. I can't thank her or tell her I understand. But I can finish what she started. I can make sure her sacrifice meant something." The article ran with the headline, "The Lighthouse Keeper's Daughter, How One Woman's Sacrifice Protected $300 million in Art and Her Child." It was shared millions of times. While the legal and criminal proceedings played out, the paintings began their journey back to public view. The process was meticulous, careful, reverent. Each piece was examined, conserved if needed, prepared for display. The Monet went to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, where it was unveiled in a special ceremony attended by art lovers from around the world. The placard beside it read, Le Jardin de Giverny, Claude Monet, 1899. Part of the Ashford collection, stolen 1986, recovered 2024 through the courage of Eleanor Whitmore and the sacrifice of James Whitmore. Preserved in secret for 37 years to protect both art and family. The Rembrandt went to the National Gallery. The Vermeer to the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, a diplomatic agreement that took weeks to negotiate. The Picasso, the Van Gogh, the Degas, each found homes in museums where millions could see them, study them, be moved by them. And at each unveiling, Maren was invited to attend. She stood before paintings worth tens of millions of dollars and saw not just artistic masterpieces, but her parents' legacy. Every brushstroke her father had died protecting, every carefully preserved canvas her mother had guarded in isolation. The museum visits became a kind of pilgrimage for Maren, a way to process grief and loss and find meaning in sacrifice. At the Van Gogh unveiling in Chicago, a young girl approached her, maybe 10 years old, wearing a foster care group home t-shirt. "Are you the Lighthouse lady?" the girl asked shyly. Maren knelt down to her level. "I am. My counselor said you grew up in foster care too, like me." "I did. She said you found out your mum loved you, that she didn't leave you because she didn't want you." Maren's throat tightened. "That's right. She left me to save me. It's the hardest thing a mother can do." The girl was quiet for a moment, then whispered, "Do you think my mum loved me too?" Maren didn't know this child's story, didn't know the circumstances that had brought her into state care, but she looked into those hopeful, hurting eyes and said, "I don't know your story, but I know you deserve love. You deserve to be protected. And whoever you become, whatever you achieve, it's going to be because you're strong enough to survive not knowing, just like I did." The girl hugged her suddenly, fiercely. Maren hugged her back and felt something shift inside her chest. This was why Eleanor had done it. This was why the sacrifice had mattered, not just to save art, but to save a child who would grow up to prove that being abandoned didn't mean being unloved, that not knowing where you came from didn't determine where you could go. The Eleanor and James Whitmore Foundation launched 6 months after the trial ended. Maren used part of her settlement to establish an endowment, ensuring the foundation could operate in perpetuity. The mission was threefold: provide college scholarships for foster children, fund art education programs in underserved communities, and support research into art crime prevention. The foundation's headquarters? The keeper's cottage at Ravens Point Lighthouse. Maren had spent months renovating the cottage and tower, transforming them into something Eleanor would have been proud of. The cottage now housed offices, a small library of art books, and a meeting space for educational programs. The tower itself became a museum. The first floor held exhibits about Lighthouse history and Eleanor's life as keeper's daughter. The second floor detailed the Ashford heist and James Whitmore's investigation. The third floor displayed copies of Eleanor's journals and photographs of the recovered collection. And the top floor, the sealed room where the paintings had hidden for 37 years, became a meditation space. No art hung there, just windows looking out over the endless ocean and a simple plaque. In this room, Eleanor Whitmore protected $367 million in stolen art for 28 years. She also protected her daughter, giving her up so she might live safely. This space honors all parents who make impossible choices out of love, and all children who grow up not knowing they were cherished. You were never abandoned. You were saved. The Lighthouse Museum opened on March 10th, 2 years to the day after Maren was born. 2 years after she'd found the inheritance letter that started everything. Over 2,000 people attended the opening ceremony. Art historians, former foster children, FBI agents who'd worked the case, museum directors, and townspeople who'd kept vigil during those dangerous days. Ruth Calloway cut the ribbon, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Eleanor was my friend," she said into the microphone. "She was brave and lonely and stubborn, and so full of love it hurt. She would have been so proud of what her daughter has built here, so proud of the woman Maren became despite everything. This lighthouse was Eleanor's prison for 28 years. Now it's a beacon of hope. That feels right. Visitors toured the exhibits, climbed the spiral staircase where Maren had discovered her mother's story, stood in the circular room where $367 million in art had waited in darkness. They read Eleanor's journals, saw photographs of James and baby Maren, learned about sacrifice and courage and the complicated nature of love. A foster care group from Portland visited in the first month. 15 teenagers, all in state custody, all searching for identity and belonging. Maren led the tour personally. She showed them the compass, explained how it had been the only connection to her past for 28 years. She showed them the photographs of Eleanor holding her as an infant, the love evident in every image. "I spent my whole childhood angry," Maren told them as they stood in the tower's top floor. "I thought I'd been thrown away, that I wasn't wanted, but I was wrong. I was desperately wanted, desperately loved. My mother made the hardest choice of her life to protect me." A teenage boy, maybe 16, raised his hand. "But you still grew up alone, without your real mum. How is that supposed to make it better?" Maren considered the question carefully. "It doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't give me back the years I lost, but it changes what that pain means. I'm not the girl nobody wanted. I'm the daughter someone loved so much they were willing to never see her again to keep her safe. That changes everything." The teens were quiet, processing. Some looked skeptical, others thoughtful. One girl was crying silently. After the tour, that girl approached Maren. "My mum left me at a fire station when I was 2 days old," she said. "I always thought she just didn't want to deal with a baby. But maybe it was hard for her too. Maybe she thought she was saving me." "Maybe she was," Maren said gently. "You'll never know for sure. I got lucky. I found answers. Most people don't. But you get to decide what your story means. You get to decide if being left behind makes you broken or makes you strong." "What did you decide?" Maren smiled. "I decided I'm strong enough to honor the people who loved me, even if I never got to love them back. I'm strong enough to build something that matters, and I'm strong enough to help other people find their own strength." The girl nodded, wiping her eyes. "Can I come back? To volunteer or something?" "Anytime," Maren said. "This place belongs to you as much as it belongs to me." The foundation grew. Within the first year, they awarded 43 college scholarships to former foster children. They funded art programs in 12 schools across Maine. They hosted workshops, lectures, and support groups. The Lighthouse became more than a museum. It became a community. Maren found herself settling into a life she'd never imagined possible. She moved permanently into the keeper's cottage, waking each morning to the sound of waves and seagulls. She hired a small staff to help run the foundation and museum. She spent her days meeting with scholarship recipients, coordinating with museums about the recovered art, giving tours to school groups, and slowly, carefully, healing. Ruth became her closest friend and unofficial grandmother. They had dinner together twice a week, cooking in the cottage kitchen while discussing foundation business and swapping stories about Eleanor. Ruth filled in gaps in Maren's knowledge about her mother. Small things, like how Eleanor loved mystery novels and could identify every type of seabird on the coast, how she'd kept a garden of wildflowers and talked to them while she weeded. Derek visited regularly too, though his visits took on a different character over time. He helped with security at events, sure, but he also stayed for coffee afterward, started bringing pastries from the bakery in town, asked Maren about her day and actually listened to the answers. One evening, as they sat on the lighthouse gallery watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of orange and purple, he said, "You've built something incredible here. Eleanor would be amazed." "I hope so," Maren said. "I hope wherever she is, she knows I understand, that I'm not angry, that I'm grateful. I think she knows." Derek was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something? Do you ever regret it, finding out the truth?" Sometimes ignorance is easier than knowing how much was sacrificed for you. Maren thought about it. No, she finally said. The truth hurt. It still hurts. But it also set me free. I spent 28 years feeling like I came from nothing. Now I know I came from everything. From love and courage and sacrifice. That's worth the pain of knowing. Derek reached over and took her hand. The gesture was gentle, questioning. Maren looked down at their intertwined fingers and felt something unfamiliar. Possibility. The chance to build not just a foundation or museum, but a life, a future. She squeezed his hand back. 2 years after opening the Lighthouse Museum, Maren received an invitation that stopped her cold. The Louvre in Paris was hosting a special exhibition, the Ashford Collection, Art Saved by Sacrifice. 20 of the recovered paintings would be displayed together for the first time since the theft, and Maren was invited as the guest of honor. She almost didn't go. The thought of standing in front of international media, art critics, and dignitaries made her want to hide, but Ruth talked her into it. "Your mother never got recognition for what she did," Ruth said firmly. "She died alone and forgotten. This is your chance to make sure the world knows what she sacrificed. Don't waste it." So Maren went to Paris. She stood in the Louvre's Grand Exhibition Hall, surrounded by paintings her parents had died to protect. Monet beside Rembrandt beside Vermeer. 300 years of artistic genius, gathered in one room because a lighthouse keeper had been brave enough to hide them and a daughter had been brave enough to reveal them. The curator, a distinguished French woman named Madame Chevrolet, gave a speech about art and sacrifice. But when Maren stepped to the podium, she didn't talk about the paintings. She talked about her mother. "Eleanor Whitmore could have sold these paintings," Maren said, her voice echoing through the hall packed with hundreds of people. "She could have taken one, just one, and lived comfortably for the rest of her life. She could have negotiated with the men who wanted them, traded the art for safety. Instead, she hid them, protected them, maintained them perfectly for 28 years, and she gave up the person she loved most, her daughter, to ensure those men could never use me as leverage. My mother died alone. She died protecting art she would never see hanging in museums. She died waiting for a daughter who came too late, but she didn't die in vain. Every person who stands in front of these paintings and feels something, wonder, joy, connection to something larger than themselves, they're experiencing what my mother preserved, what my father died to protect. That's legacy. That's love." The applause was thunderous. Maren saw people wiping tears, saw museum directors nodding, saw the young art students in the back row looking at the paintings with new eyes, understanding that art wasn't just about beauty. It was about the human stories woven into every brushstroke. After the ceremony, a woman approached Maren. She was in her 70s, elegant, with white hair and sharp eyes that looked familiar somehow. "Miss Whitmore," she said, "I'm Margaret Ashford. My late husband founded the Ashford Museum." Maren's breath caught. This was the widow of the man whose museum had been robbed, whose collection had been scattered and hidden for nearly 40 years. "I wanted to thank you," Margaret continued. "The theft destroyed my husband. He died believing he'd failed to protect the art he loved. But you proved he didn't fail. The collection survived. It's back in the world where it belongs. You gave me closure I never thought I'd have." Maren didn't know what to say. She'd expected anger or resentment, not gratitude. Margaret smiled gently. "Your mother was a guardian of beauty. Thank you for finishing her work." Flying home from Paris, Maren looked out the airplane window at clouds stretching to the horizon and felt a profound sense of completion. She'd honored her parents. She'd returned the art. She'd built something lasting from the ruins of their sacrifices. But there was still one thing left to do. She went directly from the airport to the cemetery outside Cove Harbour, where Eleanor had been reburied after the exhumation and investigation. The original grave had been simple, unmarked. Maren had commissioned a new headstone, and it had finally been installed. She stood before it in the fading afternoon light, reading the inscription she'd agonized over for months. Eleanor Ann Whitmore, July 22, 1943, December 8, 2015. Beloved daughter, wife, mother, guardian of beauty, keeper of truth. She gave up everything to save what mattered most. Beside Eleanor Stone was a second one. James Michael Whitmore, May 15, 1954, July 30, 1987, beloved husband, father. He died protecting the truth. His courage changed the world. Marin had arranged for James's remains to be moved from his unmarked grave in Boston. Now her parents were together, overlooking the ocean they'd both loved, near the lighthouse that had become their monument. She knelt between the stones and placed flowers on each, wildflowers for Eleanor, the kind she'd grown in her lighthouse garden, and lilies for James, because Eleanor's journals mentioned they were his favorite. "I found them," Marin said softly. "The paintings. All of them. They're in museums now, where people can see them, where they belong." The wind carried her words out toward the sea. "I found the truth, too, about what happened to you both, about why you made the choices you made, and I want you to know, I understand. I'm not angry. I'm not bitter. I'm grateful." Her voice cracked. "I'm grateful you loved me enough to let me go. I'm grateful you were brave enough to do the right thing, even when it cost you everything. I'm grateful I got to tell your story, to make sure the world knows you were heroes." She pressed her palm against Eleanor's stone, imagining she could feel warmth, connection. "I wish I'd known you. I wish we'd had time together. But I know you through what you left me, through the compass and the journals and the lighthouse, through the choices you made that showed me what love really means." Tears streamed down Marin's face now, unchecked. "I'm going to live a good life, Mom. I'm going to make it count. I'm going to help kids who grew up like me, show them they're not alone. I'm going to protect art and truth and all the things you and Dad believed in." She stood, wiping her eyes. "Thank you for everything, for the sacrifice, for the love, for believing I'd be strong enough to carry this. I won't let you down." As she walked back to her car, Derek was waiting, leaning against the hood. She'd called him from the airport. He'd come without question. "How are you doing?" he asked gently. "Better," Marin said. "I think I'm finally ready to stop grieving what I lost and start celebrating what I found." He pulled her into a hug. Over his shoulder she could see the lighthouse in the distance, standing tall against the darkening sky. It wasn't a prison anymore. It wasn't a tomb for secrets. It was a light, a beacon, a symbol of hope for everyone who'd ever felt lost. 3 years after opening the steel door in the lighthouse tower, Marin stood in the cottage living room, which had been transformed into a conference space for a special occasion. 43 young adults sat in folding chairs, all former foster children, all recipients of Eleanor and James Whitmore Foundation scholarships. This was the first annual scholarship gathering. Marin had invited every recipient to come to the lighthouse, meet each other, share their stories. She wanted them to know they were part of something larger than themselves, a legacy built on sacrifice and love. 3 years ago, Marin began, I was a waitress living paycheck to paycheck, feeling like I'd come from nothing. I had no family, no history, no understanding of where I belonged. And then I inherited a lighthouse. Some of the students smiled. They knew the story. Everyone did. What I found in that lighthouse changed everything. Not just the art, though that was pretty amazing. Scattered laughter. What I found was proof that I'd been loved, that my mother had made the hardest choice imaginable to protect me, that my father had died standing up for what was right. She looked around the room at all those young faces, each carrying their own wounds, their own questions about where they came from and why. You're here because my parents believed art and education could change lives, because they believed children deserved chances, protection, love, even if it came in unexpected ways. You're here because their sacrifice meant something, because I made a choice to turn their loss into something beautiful. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. What would you say to your mom if you could talk to her now? Marin smiled, blinking back tears that still came easily when she thought about Eleanor. I'd tell her I understand. I'd tell her I forgive her, even though there's nothing to forgive. I'd tell her she made the right choice. that I'm okay, that I'm happy, and I'd tell her thank you. Thank you for loving me enough to let me go. She paused. But mostly, I'd tell her I'm doing exactly what she hoped I'd do. I'm protecting what matters. I'm helping people. I'm making sure her sacrifice wasn't in vain. After the gathering, Maren walked out to the Lighthouse gallery. The sun was setting, painting the sky in impossible colors. Derek joined her, slipping his hand into hers. They'd been together officially for 8 months now, taking it slow, building something solid. "Big day," he said. "Good day," Maren corrected. She leaned into him, feeling the warmth, the security of being chosen by someone who saw all of her, the broken parts and the strong parts, and stayed anyway. "Eleanor would be proud," Derek said. "I hope so." Maren looked out at the ocean, vast and endless. "You know what's funny? I spent my whole life feeling abandoned, feeling like I didn't belong anywhere, and now I have this." She gestured to the lighthouse, the foundation, the life she'd built. "I belong to something bigger than myself. I belong to their legacy." "You belong to yourself too," Derek said gently. "You built all this. Yes, it started with Eleanor and James, but what you've done with it, that's all you." Maren considered that. He was right. She'd taken the raw materials of tragedy and sacrifice and built something living, breathing, growing. The foundation would outlive her. The lighthouse would stand for generations. Kids she'd never meet would receive scholarships funded by art her parents had protected. That was legacy. That was love made visible. "Come on," Derek said. "Ruth's making dinner. She'll be mad if we're late." They walked back to the cottage together, hands linked, the lighthouse beam beginning its nightly rotation behind them. Maren glanced back once, seeing it sweep across the darkening ocean, warning ships away from danger, guiding them home, just like her mother had done for her, kept her safe in the only way she could, guided her home when the time was right. The compass that had started everything sat on Maren's desk now, in a place of honor. She'd had it professionally cleaned and restored, though she kept it close, taking it out sometimes just to hold, to feel that connection across time and loss. The symbols etched around its edge no longer seemed mysterious. They told a story of a mother's love, a father's courage, and a daughter who found her way home through darkness to light. 5 years after discovering the sealed tower, Maren received news that the final member of the conspiracy, a wealthy collector who'd financed the original theft, had died in prison. Marcus Thorne, David Prescott, Paul Ashford, and 7 others connected to the Ashford heist were all behind bars, their fortunes seized, their reputations destroyed. Justice, slow but certain, had prevailed. To mark the occasion, the Louvre announced a permanent installation, the Ashford Collection, a story of sacrifice and salvation. 5 paintings would rotate on permanent display, each with detailed placards telling the story of Eleanor and James Whitmore, of art hidden to protect both beauty and a child, of a daughter who finished her parents' work. Maren attended the opening with Ruth, Derek, and a delegation of scholarship recipients. Standing in front of the Monet her mother had preserved for 28 years, she felt a sense of completion so profound it made her dizzy. "We did it," she whispered. "Mom, Dad, we finished it." A little girl tugged on Maren's sleeve. She was maybe 6, there with her foster parents who'd read about the Lighthouse story and wanted their daughter to understand that complicated families could still be filled with love. "Are you the Lighthouse lady?" the girl asked. Maren knelt down. "I am. My foster mum says your real mum loved you so much she hid you to keep you safe. Is that true?" "It's true." The girl thought about this seriously. "I don't know my real mum, but my foster mum loves me too. Does that count?" Maren's throat tightened. She glanced up at the woman standing nearby, who was clearly fighting tears. "That counts more than anything," Maren said. "Love is love, no matter where it comes from." The girl smiled and ran back to her foster mother, who scooped her up in a fierce hug. Derek slipped his arm around Maren's waist. "You okay?" "Yeah," Maren said, and she meant it. "I'm good. I'm really, really good." because she'd learned something crucial in these 5 years of uncovering truth and building legacy. Being abandoned wasn't the same as being unloved. Not knowing where you came from didn't mean you had no foundation, and sometimes the people who saved you were the ones who had to let you go. Eleanor had given Maren everything: a name, a history, a purpose, and, most importantly, proof that she'd been cherished. That was worth more than $367 million in art. Worth more than any inheritance. That was the gift of knowing you came from love, even if that love looked different than you'd imagined. Years passed. The lighthouse became a landmark, not just of coastal Maine, but of hope and resilience. The foundation grew, awarding hundreds of scholarships, funding dozens of programs. Maren married Derek in a small ceremony on the Lighthouse Gallery, with Ruth officiating and 40 former scholarship recipients in attendance. She adopted 2 children from foster care, siblings, ages 8 and 10, who needed to know that being placed in state custody didn't mean the end of their story, just the beginning of a different one. She taught them about Eleanor and James, showed them the compass, took them up the spiral staircase to the circular room where secrets had been kept and truth had been sealed away until the right time. "Your grandmother was a hero," she told them. "Your grandfather too. They gave up everything for what was right, and now we honor that by living lives that matter, by helping people, by protecting what's beautiful and true." Her daughter, Lily, named for James's favorite flower, asked the same question Maren had once asked. "Do you think they would have liked us?" "They would have loved you," Maren said without hesitation. "Just like I do, just like Derek does, just like Ruth does. You're surrounded by people who choose to love you. That's the most powerful thing in the world." On the 10th anniversary of discovering the sealed tower, Maren stood once more at her parents' graves. But this time she wasn't alone. Derek stood beside her, their children gathered close. Ruth had passed 2 years earlier, but her nephew Derek carried her memory in everything he did. "I brought them to meet you," Maren said to the headstones. "Your grandchildren. They know your story. They know what you sacrificed. And they're going to grow up understanding that family isn't just about biology, it's about love and choice and sacrifice." Lily placed flowers on Eleanor's grave. Her brother James, named for the grandfather he'd never meet, placed flowers on James's stone. "Thank you for keeping Mum safe," young James said solemnly to the headstone. "So she could keep us safe." Maren's eyes filled with tears. That was it. That was the whole truth condensed into one simple statement from a child. The cycle of sacrifice and salvation, of love protecting love across generations. They walked back to the lighthouse together, a family knit together by choice and circumstance, by tragedy transformed into purpose. The Eleanor and James Whitmore Foundation had helped over 300 children by now. The Lighthouse Museum hosted 50,000 visitors annually. The story had been told in books, documentaries, even a film that Maren had consulted on to ensure accuracy. But none of that mattered as much as the small moments. The quiet certainty that she'd done right by her parents, that she'd turned their sacrifice into something living and growing and good. That night, after the children were asleep, Maren climbed to the top of the lighthouse tower one more time. She stood in the circular room where it had all begun, where she'd opened crate after crate of impossible beauty and understood for the first time the depth of her mother's love. The room was empty now, except for the meditation cushions and the plaque honoring Eleanor's sacrifice. The paintings were in museums where millions could see them, but the space itself felt full of memory, of meaning, of love that had transcended death and time and separation. Maren pulled out the compass she still carried everywhere. The metal was warm in her palm, worn smooth by years of handling. She'd had it tested once, analyzed by experts who confirmed it was nearly 200 years old, likely a family heirloom passed down through Eleanor's line. The symbols weren't any known language but appeared to be a personal code, perhaps created by a long-ago ancestor to mark waypoints or treasure. It had been Eleanor's most precious possession, and she'd given it to Maren, knowing it would guide her daughter home when the time was right. "I made it, Mom," Maren whispered into the empty room. I found my way home. I found the truth. I found myself. The lighthouse beam rotated overhead, casting its light across the dark ocean. Warning, guiding, protecting. Just like Eleanor had protected her daughter, just like James had protected the truth, just like Maren would protect her children and the legacy she'd been given. Because that's what love does. It protects, it sacrifices, it endures beyond death, beyond separation, beyond every obstacle that stands in its way. Maren closed her hand around the compass and smiled. She wasn't the abandoned girl anymore. She was the lighthouse keeper's daughter, the guardian of a legacy built on courage and sacrifice, the woman who turned tragedy into triumph and loss into lasting change. She was exactly who she was meant to be. And somewhere, in whatever place existed beyond this world, she believed Eleanor and James knew it. Knew their daughter had found her way home. Knew their sacrifices hadn't been in vain. Knew that love, real, sacrificial, world-changing love, always finds a way. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible true stories are waiting for you. Click now to continue the journey with us. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that sometimes the greatest love means letting go, and that every person who feels abandoned deserves to know they were cherished all along.